What's up everybody? In this video we'll be going over how to set up redirects within WordPress using the Redirection plugin. We'll be covering how to set up common redirects such as 301s and 307s, as well as some of the more advanced features that are available within Redirection. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's dive into it. Alright, really quickly before we get started, I want to give a quick explanation of what redirects are for anyone who may not be familiar with them. A redirect is a tool that we can use to direct people from an old URL to a new URL. So, think of it this way, pretend that you moved houses and for some reason you didn't tell anyone that you had moved to a new house. When people come to visit, they're still going to go to your old house. So what you need to do is put up a sign that says, I no longer live here, I live at this new house. And that is essentially the same thing that a redirect does. When we create a new URL for content that was created with an old URL, we create a redirect, and what that does is that when people go to our old link, it tells them, hey, this is an old link, go to the new link, and it will direct their computer to that new link. Alright, in order to set up redirects, we need a plugin. So first things first, come to plugins and click add new. Come over to the search bar and type in redirection. We are going to use this plugin right here called Redirection. As you can see, it has over 2 million active installations, so this is a pretty trustworthy plugin. Click Install Now, and then Activate. After you've activated it, come over to the Tools tab, and somewhere in here you'll find Redirection. Click on Redirection. Alright, this will pull up a little starting screen here, which will just give you some basic information about the plugin. Go ahead and click Start Setup. On this next page, we'll have a couple of options that we can configure. It's not necessary that you configure them now, because we can configure all this stuff later on. But if you want, you can set these up. So let me explain what they are really quickly. First, we have Monitor Permalink Changes. So what this will do is, rather than us manually setting up redirects, if we enable this, it will just monitor all the permalinks, and if we ever change a URL, it will just automatically create a redirect for us. We can also keep a log of all the redirects and 404 errors, and this is helpful for troubleshooting your website, especially the 404 errors, because you'll be able to see if you have broken links somewhere out on the internet and create redirects for those. If we check this option, we also get this option to store IP address information. Now, depending on where you live in the world, there might be some restrictions regarding collecting IP address information, so just make sure that that's all good where you live before you check this, otherwise just don't enable it. Alright, once you've configured either of these, if you want to configure them, click Continue Setup. It'll now run a quick test. It says it's good, so you can click Finish Setup. Click Finished. And now we have the plugin set up, and we are ready to create redirects. Now that we have our plugin set up, let's go ahead and create our first redirect. And the first kind of redirect that we're going to learn about is a 301 redirect, which is a permanent redirect. So you use this when you want to permanently move content from one URL to a new URL. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say that I want to change the URL on one of my pages. Let's pick the About page. Right now, as you can see, the About page, the URL for it is demo.boisewebcompany.com and then /about. Let's say that I wanted to change this URL, so instead of being /about, it was /learn about us. Alright, and right here I'm going to change this to Learn About Us. And click Update. So now you can see, if you look at the URL, we've changed it from About to Learn About Us. So here's where we run into problems. Just because we changed the URL for our website doesn't mean that it updates all of the links out on the internet. So for example, let's say that somebody really liked our About page. I don't know why, but let's just say, for sake of argument, that they did. And they linked to our About page in an article that they wrote. So as you can see, I've written an article here. Pretty awesome. And I've linked to the About page of the website, but I linked to it before we changed it. So right now, this is still linked to, as you can see, the old one, boisewebcompany.com/about, and we've since changed it to Learn About Us. So if I try to follow this link, we run into an error, and it says this page doesn't seem to exist. Well, we know it exists, but it's trying to go to the wrong address. So to fix that, we need to set up a redirect. To do that, come into your dashboard. And here on Tools, you'll see somewhere listed in here, Redirection. And now we can add a new redirection. We are going to start by putting in the source URL. That's our old URL for that page, which was. And now we need to put in our target URL, which is our new URL that we just set. So that is our domain followed by Learn About Us. And then we are going to click Add Redirect. Now what this will do is, if people click on any links that are still linked to this one, the About, it will instead send them to our new one. So let's try that with our article that we wrote. If we come back to our article, which is currently linked to that old URL, and try to follow it, you can see instead of taking us to that error page, now it takes us to our new URL, Learn About Us. Pretty spiffy. Alright, the next one we're going to go over is how to set up a 307 redirect. And a 307 redirect is a temporary redirect, so you use this when you just want to temporarily redirect people away from a page on your website or your entire website for a little while. So let me give an example of this. Let's say that I was going to do some maintenance on my About page, and I didn't want people accessing this page while I'm working on it. I've gone ahead and I have created a maintenance page, and what I want to do is that when people try to access this About page, it will instead take them to the maintenance page. So to do that, I will come into my dashboard, come to Tools, and then come right here to Add New Redirect. Now by default, this is set to 301 redirects. So to set it to 307, click on this Settings button, and right here, it'll give us a drop-down menu, and we can change it to 307. Just like the 301 redirect, we start by putting in the URL that we want to direct traffic away from. In this case, it is the About page, so I will grab the URL from that and plug it in right here on Source URL. You can give it a title if you want. That'll just tell you in this list of redirects what this is for. So I will say maintenance. I spelled it correctly. I can never spell that word right. Now we need to put in the target URL, so I'll grab the URL from my maintenance page and plug it in right here on target URL. then click Add Redirect. If I come to the About tab and click it, instead of taking me to the About page, it'll take me to this page that informs me the site is currently under maintenance. It also works for external links. So let me come to my little article here, and if I follow this link to the About page of my website, instead of taking me to the About page of my website, it will instead take me to the maintenance page. Now when you're finished doing whatever it was you're doing, it's very easy to remove this redirect. Come back to your dashboard and then back to redirection. And all you need to do is right here find your temporary redirect that you created, and we're just going to disable it. If you never plan on using it again, you can delete it if you want. Now, if I come to my About page, which we had redirected, you can see that it takes us back to the About page and not the maintenance page. Now that we've set up our first two URLs, let's take a look at some of the options that are available when we set up new redirects. The first thing that we're going to look at is over here, URL options. If we click on this, we have three options. Regex, which stands for regular expression, and it's a little bit more of an advanced technique, so we will cover that later in the video. And we have ignore slash and ignore case. If we look at our URLs, let's take this one for example, you can see that it's written in lowercase and it has a slash at the end. If we enter that with uppercase letters and don't have a slash on the end, it will take us to a 404 page. However, if we check these boxes, ignore slash and ignore case, then if they enter it with uppercases, it'll just say, that's fine, make them lowercase. And if they forget to put the slash on the end, it'll say, that's fine, add the slash for them. So these options allow you to take a little bit of the perfection out of entering the URL. On the redirection page, we have this option called Query Parameters. If we click on that, we have three options, and these allow us to specify how our redirection will handle query parameters. For those of you not familiar with query parameters, let's look at this URL really quickly. We have the domain, followed by the path, and then everything after that, all of this stuff here, is query parameters. By default, this is set to exact match in any order. But we could also just ignore all of that. If we just wanted to ignore it, it would just not pay attention to this. Or we can ignore it and pass the parameters on to the target. So if we had a redirection here and our old URL had some parameters attached to it, it would just redirect to the new URL and then attach those parameters from the old URL onto the new one. Here on the redirection page, if we click on the settings icon, you can see we have this option here called match. And what this allows us to do is specify what is needed for a redirection to take place. So by default, it's just the URL. If they type in the correct URL, whether it's your old one or your new one, as long as they type it in correctly, it's a match, they get redirected. However, we have a lot more options here, and I'm not going to go over all these options, but I will link to the documentation which goes over each of these options here. I will go over this first one just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So, let's say that I created a page full of secret information. Here's my source URL, a page full of secret information, and we have our match set to URL and login status. So what we want to have happen is if someone comes to this URL, if they are logged in, then it will take them to the page full of secret information. If they are not logged in, we want it to redirect them to the login page. So when they're logged in, we want them to go to the page full of secret information. We're not actually going to fill this one in because we want it to just take them to that page. However, if they are logged out, we want them to be redirected to the login page. And we are going to add that redirect. Let's come up here and we will try typing in page full of secret information. Look at that. A page full of secret information. Absolutely zero secret information is on this page. What a disappointment. Alright, let's try logging out and doing that again. Okay, I'm logged out and I'm going to try going back to that page full of secret information. And if it works, it should take me to the login page. Ta-da! Look at that. Took us to the login page rather than to that link. Let's take a look at this option right here called Regex, or Regex, however you want to say it. It is short for regular expression. And this is a very powerful tool. It's a little bit advanced, so if you were just wanting to put in some simple redirects, don't worry, you don't need to use this. Regex allows us to do is rather than looking for a specific URL, it will look for a specific pattern. So, for example, for our regular redirects, we started by putting in the URL we wanted to redirect from. So in this case, it was theboisewebcompany.com/about. And then we put in where we wanted to redirect to, which was this URL. With Regex, rather than looking for a specific URL, it would look for a pattern. So for example, it might look for domain followed by a certain number of characters, and then it would redirect to wherever you wanted it to redirect to. That's a little bit confusing, but let me show you an example that will hopefully clear things up. So I'm going to come to articles here on my demo site, and forgive me, I set all these up in like 5 minutes, so there's zero formatting, and it looks awful and hurts me terribly, but it will get the point across. So if I click on this article, up here in the URL, there is a pattern. It is domain, followed by the year, the month, the day, the category, and then the name of the post. And each one of our articles follows this same pattern: domain, date, category, name. Let's say that for whatever reason, I wanted to change this URL so that it no longer had the date and the category. It was just domain followed by name. So I will hurry and do that, and I will show you the problem that arises when we do that. I'll come to permalinks, and I am going to change it from the format we have now to just be the domain followed by the post name. And I'll save that. Now if I come back to my article, you can see that the name or the URL has changed from having the date category name to just domain followed by name. And here's the problem. That was fine and dandy to do on our site, but any links out on the internet are still going to be using that old format. All of the links out on the internet are going to be looking like this still, having the domain, the date, the category, and the name. So let me try opening up one of these articles using the old URL, and we will see what happens. Alright, as you can see, the page doesn't exist because it's still using this old format. And you might say, well, that's not a problem. We can just put in a redirect where we redirect from that old URL to this new one. And you are 100% correct. Good job. However, we would have to do that for every one of our articles, and that would be very tedious. Well, on this website, not so much because I only have a few articles. But on your website, you might have hundreds of articles and the URL changed on all of them, which means you would have to go through and set up a redirection for every page. This is where the power of Regex comes into play. With Regex, rather than looking for that specific URL, we can look for the pattern that that URL follows. So our old pattern was domain followed by the year, the month, the day, the category. Oops, I spelled that wrong. Category, and then the post name. And we want just the domain followed by the post name. So what we can do with Regex is look for this pattern here and then redirect it to our new URL. Now obviously you can see all these notifications popping up. This is not how you write regex expressions. Regex is kind of a language all its own. So I won't be covering all the syntax of how to use regex. You're going to have to travel into the wide world of the internet and find that out, because this video would be hours long if I did that. Fortunately, there's tons of resources online. It's a common thing, so just go online and look up regex or regular expression and you'll find tons of resources. So now I will write an expression that will look for this particular pattern and then redirect to the correct URL. Okay, here's our regex expression. If you've never seen one of these before, it might look very confusing, so let me explain what this is saying. The pattern that our URLs followed was date, category, post name. What this expression will look for is 4 digits, which corresponds to the 4 digits of the year, 2 digits corresponding to the 2 digits of the month, 2 more digits, which corresponds with the 2 digits of the day, a string of text corresponding to the category here, and then another string of text corresponding to the post name. And these parentheses mean that we are going to capture this string of text. On our target URL, we will take the captured data here and we'll basically just paste it after the domain. So our regex will look for anything that follows this pattern, capture the last little bit, which in our case is going to be the post name, and then paste it onto our new URL after the domain. So let's give this a try and see if it works. All right, let's grab one of our, I'm going to use this one because I've never actually opened up this article after I wrote it. So it shouldn't be cached, and I'm actually going to open up an incognito tab just to make it a little more. Please work. And there you go. Even though we used that old URL, our regex was able to recognize that it fit the pattern and it redirected us to the correct URL. So as you can see, this regex expression that we created right here allowed us to redirect all of those URLs we changed with just this single redirect. So they're very powerful, but they are a little advanced, and the regex syntax can be a little tricky to learn. So if you don't know how to use this, don't worry about it. Let's take a look right here at this tab titled Options. There is some interesting stuff in here that we can go over. First of all is logs. This will tell you how long to keep a log of all of your redirects. So you can specify whether you don't want it to keep logs, a day, a week, a month, however long you would like. We can also keep a log of all of our 404 errors. So if somebody gets redirected, so if somebody clicks on a broken link and they get a 404 error, it will notify us. So if we want to, we can go in and fix that link. We also have IP logging. So this will keep a record of the various IP addresses that use our redirect. Depending on where you live, there may be laws regarding the collection of IP addresses, so just make sure that it's legal if you are going to collect IP addresses. Otherwise, you can anonymize the IP or just not log IPs at all. Now, right here, URL. This is kind of cool stuff. If we enable URL monitoring, what that will do is, if we change one of our URLs, rather than manually going in and creating a redirect, this plugin will just monitor those, and if it sees that we changed a URL, it'll automatically create a redirect. So we could check all of these if we wanted to. And then whenever we change any URLs on our site, it will just automatically create a new redirect. All right. Well, that was a long video. If you made it clear to the end, I commend you. Hopefully you found some of the information in there to be helpful. If you did, please consider leaving a like or subscribing, and I will see you next time.